former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General James Jones.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor to be here as chairman of the Atlantic Council and former Allied commander from 2003 to 2006. I have the honor of doing two things. One is to introducing a great ambassador, Ambassador Jorge Domecq, who is going to make a presentation to you. And then following that, very quickly, we'll transition to welcome General Scaparrotti, the current SACEUR, for a conversation. So allow me to make very brief introductions in order to get to the heart of the matter. Ambassador Domecq is in his second term as Chief Executive Officer of the European Defence Agency, a position he's held since 2015. He is a seasoned diplomat from Spain, as you know, who has represented his country in critical roles, including serving as director of the Secretary General's personal staff in his private office, Spain's ambassador to the Philippines, and Spain's permanent representative to the OSCE. Now, as CEO of the European Defence Agency, he's responsible for enhancing European Union defence capabilities, stimulating research and development in European defence industry, and catalyzing greater defence cooperation within the EU. Very, very big job. And it's now my honor to introduce Ambassador Jorge Domecq. Mr. Ambassador, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
How are you?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here today. For me, it's a comeback after a few years out of NATO headquarters, but it also shows how much the world has changed in this period, also in terms of EU-NATO relations. And we've had the joint declaration 2 days ago, a very strong reference to the cooperation with EU in the summit declaration yesterday. And what I would like is to make 3 points regarding what, as EDA Chief Executive, I think is important. First, 1 point about the very hot debate that has taken place on burden sharing these days. I think burden sharing is, to a certain extent, a debate that can become quite artificial. But I think what we should concentrate on is what we deliver, not what we put into defense, but what we get out of defense. And when we look out at the output in European terms, I think coming from Warsaw 2 years ago and where we stand now, there is a lot that has been accomplished, with now the permanent structured cooperation being launched, a European Defence Fund with EU funding devoted to defence. We have an annual review of defence, and all this to try and bring about a capability development plan which is fully coherent with what NATO needs in terms of capabilities also. That coherence is going to give us one single set of forces, thinking of where the shortfalls are about in Europe, but making the pool of forces of European countries more interoperable, more sustainable, with a less fragmented approach to defense planning. The second point I would like to make is this debate is not about only cash. It's about contributions and it's about capabilities. And if we talk about contributions, I would like to highlight one where we have worked very closely with NATO, which is military mobility. This is a blueprint of what we could do in many other domains as far as contributions. We have now in place a pledge, which is mirrored from the pledge that a few days ago the EU leaders brought about, with a commitment of whole government approach, which the EU can bring to the table. We have also a commitment to use EU funding for the transport network in Europe to make military mobility more easy. But the most important thing is, as far as military mobility, we have a commitment by all 28 member states a long-term commitment to make it happen. And this is very important, not only for collective defense, which it is, because as the Secretary General has said, it's not only having the capabilities, but having the ability to move them to the right place when you need them. It is as important to spend on those capabilities as to have the ability to move them. And this is not only, as I say, for collective defense in Europe, for deterrence, it is also a very important aspect for power projection. And this is something that our transatlantic allies should not forget. Military mobility and what EU brings to the table. If I look at capabilities, I would refer to the permanent structural cooperation. The main output of the permanent structural cooperation, it is the commitment by 25 of the EU member states to plan together, to develop capability together, and to deploy together. This very strong binding commitment is going to make a fragmented approach in Europe, where we are the second spender in the world, but the output so far is not good, to get better. And that will be, as I say, to the benefit also of NATO. And the third point I would like to bring about, sometimes the concept of strategic autonomy, which when it's brought up, it is thought as something which is contentious or which can make the cooperation between EU and NATO less strong. I would say to the contrary. The US is asking Europe to stand on its own feet and to take its fair share of the burden. Strategic autonomy is exactly about developing capabilities which are separable but not separate. We need capabilities which are state-of-the-art, which are going to serve the same forces, and they need to rely on industrial skills and research and development, which is top of the notch. It would be quite absurd to consider that this is talking about protectionism. It is talking about being a reliable partner, a partner who has stronger capabilities and therefore that can provide them when needed, and if so decided by the allies. And here I would like to say it wouldn't make much sense to ask for Europe or the EU to have more capable, more stronger capabilities, if at the same time we would not like them to be capabilities which are sufficiently autonomous in terms of the skills and the research you need to put into them, and to be more reliant on R&D efforts in the US. This brings me to the point. Strategic autonomy is trying also to avoid that the technological gap grows in between both sides of the Atlantic. It has been said so very clearly in the Warsaw Declaration that we need a strong industrial base on both sides of the Atlantic, but also within Europe, strengthening defense cooperation. And if we are able to keep that technological gap closed, the interoperable gap will not grow, and at the same time that will also ease tensions on the political gap that might be there if we allow that technological gap to grow. So to end up, I think that in this debate on sharing the burden, strategic autonomy is a requirement for our common objective, which is to protect European citizens and to do it in a way which allows us to be reliable, trusted partners with the right capabilities. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you. Ambassador, thank you very much. And obviously, for everyone here, the work that the ambassador does with the European Defence Agency and he's outlined the importance of complementing the current transatlantic effort to enhance our deterrence, to bolster readiness and mobility in Europe, and even, dare I say it, even out burden sharing and capabilities on this side of the Atlantic. So thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. So now it's my pleasure to ask General Scaparrotti, SACEUR, to please come forward and allow me to introduce him, although he needs no introduction. As the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Commander U.S. European Command, General Mike Scaparrotti. General Scaparrotti has led a long and distinguished career in the United States Army, serving previously as Commander of Combined Forces Command, U.S. Forces Korea, Director of the Joint Staff in Washington, and Commander of the International Security Assistance Force Joint Command and Deputy Commander of U.S. Forces Afghanistan, among many other roles. General Scaparrotti, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please. So we're looking forward to having a conversation with General Scaparrotti, with him about the military deliverables of this summit. And after a brief conversation on this stage, I will take some questions from the audience, and I'm sure you'll have quite a few for him. Mike, thanks very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to address the NATO Engages Forum. We'll start directly with the first question. And General, as a retired SAC, soaking up in the substance of this event, it's clear to me just how much the security situation for NATO has evolved since my time in your job. Can you help us understand the main evolutions in the global and Euro-Atlantic security environment that you're observing? And how do the military decisions taken at the summit address those evolutions?
Well, Jim, first, thank you for taking part in this with me. I'm honored, humbled to have followed in your footsteps here as a SAC. You're somebody I admired as a younger officer, actually worked with from time to time, so thank you very much. You know, as we look at the environment today, one of the things as we work with some of the directives from Warsaw, the changes over the past 2 years, and the things that today will be a substance of this summit, there's been some dramatic changes in the environment. And the way I usually try and sketch it out is if you go back to around 2010, the assumptions were made, and that was the last, that was when we made one of our substantive changes to the NATO command structure, 2010. At that time, Russia was being seen as a partner. We were trying to integrate them into Europe, engage Russia. We had their leadership in SHAPE headquarters, visiting SHAPE headquarters, in our operations center, for instance. Today, they're at least a competitor, if not an adversary. I think you know full well the challenges that Russia's presented. Secondly, at that time, we didn't believe in the West and the United States, and we didn't have a peer competitor. Across all the military domains, we were dominant, and we were very sure of that. We could demonstrate it, and we had demonstrated it. That's not the case today. We have peer competitors. Russia, for instance, we still have dominance in most of the military domains, but they're on a very substantial modernization of their force today. And if we don't improve, if we don't continue our modernization, that could change in, say, 4 or 5 years. So, peer competitor. The third one is technology. Think about the difference between 2010 and today. Cyber, for instance, information technology, the connectivity of all the different systems that we have today, the Internet of Things, so to speak, and it works in the military as well. Precision munitions, the precision of those munitions, the distances that we have now. Really, at that time in 2010, we were on the verge of change, but we still looked at our commands as regional. EUCOM, for instance. Today, I operate in a multi-regional environment. I regularly work with those in Africa and Central Command in the Middle East, etc., because of that connectivity and because of the distances of our systems. And then finally, in 2010, as we look south, there was some instability in Africa at that point in time, but we were making progress as an international community, and we actually saw some of those countries that would help with that stability as well. That's a significant difference, and out of Africa today is a driver of many of the things that we have to deal with as challenges here in Europe. The final thing I'll mention is, as we look at what we do today, and it ties to the NATO command structure change I'll talk about, I'm sure, in a bit, is that as I operate today, my activity level, my op tempo that's required today has gone up considerably, even in the last couple of years, because of the challenges. Russia's more active. They've got better systems. They're employing them in different ways. But also, we've got a greater threat from terrorism. I don't have to bring that out. It's well known here, and its impact on the fabric of Europe. That's one of those factors. The other is, I mentioned the speed of information. Think about the speed of that information and then the speed of influence on people. that alone is a significant factor, and it has a lot to do with the way that we operate. So I'll kind of leave it at that as kind of sketching out how I see the environmental change from then and some of the factors today that impact on some of the changes that we see coming out of this summit.
Well, thank you. We just heard Ambassador Domecq speak about NATO and the EU's efforts to enhance troop mobility across Europe, and readiness and deterrence kind of go hand in hand as well, and they're two important themes of the summit. Can you tell us a little bit more about the summit deliverables on readiness, particularly the 430s concept? How does the 430s concept impact you as a military commander, and what lies ahead at making this commitment into a reality?
Yeah. And for me, I think, Jim, that the biggest sticker on this is that it helps me with a mindset of readiness. We were in a period, say again, 2010. The transition that we've made, even in the time that I've been in command here, is a change in mindset. Mm-hmm. When we were doing partnership, we didn't worry about readiness so much, just the capability of the force. We had time to deploy it in the things we were doing. Any kind of crisis was slow to develop. It was limited. We knew that we could handle it with the forces that we had available at the time. That's not the case today. So today we've got to have ready forces, and the main thing is a mindset of readiness. Now, secondly, you've probably heard about the 430s, 30 battalion combat teams on the ground, 30 squadrons in terms of air, 30 naval combatants in 30 days or less for employment. So what does that do for me? It's actually going to be a tasker to me, and I'll get to fill out the definition of that. So that's important to me as well, because it gives me an opportunity as a commander to actually shape this and bring it back to the NAC for what fits best with our environment and for our plans. So today we have a joint high readiness task force and an enhanced NATO response force that came out of Wales and then Warsaw. So the reason we need this is that we have other forces that the alliance countries have pledged to me, but we were not clear on the availability and the readiness of those forces. So I'll be able to line this out, get approval at the NAC, and then have requirements for those entities within that additional force to the enhanced NRF at a very well-known readiness rate, a requirement for what comes with that, to including enablers, ammunition, etc. And I'll be able to better plan for the utilization of those forces. So it's a significant directive coming out of this summit, as far as I'm concerned as a commander.
From my experience, particularly in mobilizing the alliance for deployment to Afghanistan, trying to do that can have its challenges and certainly its rewards, maybe with more emphasis on challenges. What are some of the current challenges and rewards that you see at present in trying to bring about a new force in readiness, if you will?
Well, you know, the one thing that's just wonderful about being an alliance, and you experience this too, is on the one hand, the challenges of the diversity of languages, cultures, experiences. On the other hand, with that, if you can harness it, it's incredible. A headquarters of, say, 30 different nations, on one hand, can be challenging to do planning, etc. But if you learn how to do that and you grasp that, you're going to have a better plan. There's no doubt about it. I've now done this for a little while, and I think that's one of the things first that I see. But of course, the challenges to that are, in fact, that you've got very different perspectives about how to do things, and you have to develop a culture within that command that not only will the commander, but those who are there present their thoughts, also be open to other thoughts, be able to bring that together and work with others. That's just a challenge of leadership. We did it when we brought, as you did, when you led us into Afghanistan, and that's consistently improved in Afghanistan every time I go back.
Yeah, the interoperability is so much better. Yeah, there's no question. One of the issues that I've been passionate about from the retired seats, but still a very, very big believer in the essentiality of NATO and the transatlantic link, is I would characterize the 20th century for NATO as being more of a reactive force, but with timelines built in, I'm of the opinion that the 21st century is mandating that NATO become more proactive, and you and I have talked about this privately, more proactive and more responsive to the multiplicity of threats that we face. Can you talk a little bit about how the decisions taken at this summit will better prepare NATO to be more agile and responsive? And I think the 430s solution is part of the answer, but can you give us a little bit more color on how that affects your thinking?
Well, first of all, the readiness is again a mindset, and it helps me begin to shape the forces that I can then plan on. You talked about being more proactive. Being able to be proactive means good thinking done in advance. Right. And then plans that aren't prescriptive, but they're broad enough that you have some agility because we don't fully know the future. Right. In this summit, we got directives for increased deterrence and defense initiatives within it. We got the readiness initiative. We got the NCSA, huge, NATO command structure adaptation. The first time now, since the wall came down, that we've increased our force structure at the strategic and operational level. Why is that important? First of all, remember the activity level and the op tempo. Right. We just need more people in each of our component commands, air, sea, land, that do this work because they're very busy. That gives you greater flexibility, by the way. We also needed new skill sets. It was a little over a year ago, we named cyber a domain in NATO. It's not that each of the nations weren't realizing that, but we actually have to develop doctrine, put operational procedures in place, begin to integrate that along with the other domains, and we've been working that. So out of this summit is a directive to establish a cyber operations center, which we've got a head start on, by the way. We've got it up because we got a NAC approval to begin shifting some people. So we're ahead of that. It includes also that same skill set at the operational level with some teams that can go to tactical to help me get ahead of this. Very, very important in and of itself. The framework for the South. There's a lot of challenges in the South, and one that, frankly, the nations of the South were not quite pleased with where we're at. They thought we could do more. CT's a part of this, counterterrorism, and I thought we could do more. This summit gave a package for the South that specifically named some of the things like potentially forces set, commands to react to specific kinds of challenges we might have in the South, some advanced planning that I can do for the South, and importantly, the hub for the South, which I might take a question on. So I could go on, but those are some of the things that they're exciting about this summit. And, you know, when you come out of this, I'll bet you I've got someplace at minimum probably 40, maybe around 60 tasks that come out of this summit.
Well, you're absolutely correct. I mean, we have to, on the one hand, be capable to move armies, navies, and air forces, special forces around quickly. At the same time, we can't dismiss the fact that we're in an era of network-centric competition. And I would say that it's both in the military and in the private sector. And so this public and private interface on this new threat is going to be very important for the alliance and you know, for our individual countries as well. Thank you very much for that, Mike. And I'd like to open the floor to some questions. And the gentleman right here, please. And then you.
Okay.
Thank you.
General, I'm Dragos Stasso. I'm a journalist from Romania. We had before President Poroshenko here at this debate, and I would like to ask you more about the security around the Black Sea area, about the continuing militarization of the Crimea Peninsula. We have seen that Russia continues to build up over there, and also to comment a little bit about the movement of troops around Europe. We know that we had at some point problems in Romania for troops entering in the country for simple exercise, and how you as a commander will try to improve all these things. Thank you.
Yeah, we've actually, the Black Sea region has been a focus here for the past couple of years. First of all, I would note tailored forward presence that put a multinational brigade in Romania and Bulgaria. Also had a maritime component to it, was the first step. In this summit, we acknowledged that. We called for the reinforcement of that multinational brigade. We recognize that Romania is willing to establish a core-level headquarters for the Black Sea region. We expect to fill that out and do that. We're looking at a maritime component command, or it's actually a control, not a command, but a control center, specifically to help us with the Black Sea region. That exists today in our maritime component, and we're going to refine that and do some work on that in the next year. Very important aspect of this, and the summit itself, several points in the declaration point to these kinds of refinements that I'll be directed to make, and we're already working on them. We had, as you might imagine, in advance of the summit, we had, through our planning, through our exercises, determined what would help us strengthen deterrence and defense in the Black Sea region. That's what we've been working on coming out of this summit, and some of the directives that you'll see in that declaration. Crimea is an issue because of the types of systems that Russia has now put into their, defense, missile defense. There are special forces, new commands as well, naval component. Has a dynamic in terms of their capabilities in the Black Sea region. I would tell you that part of what we've done here in the Black Sea region, as well as our increased activity in the Black Sea region as NATO, is a part of that. It's international waters. We will sail, we'll fly international airspace, and we expect Russia to accept that. And so that's how we view that region, and I think we're doing quite well there, actually.
Thank you. Right behind, please.
Thank you. Sir, I'm Olivier Schmidt. I'm a professor at the Center for War Studies in Denmark. Sir, readiness for the alliance is also the ability to fight together. Could you give us a sense about where we are at in terms of joint exercises, multinational exercises? Mm-hmm. Are there any plans to increase the tempo of exercises within the alliance, and where we are at in terms of the framework mission network?
Well, that's a great question, because it gets me into something I got on my list here. If you've watched closely our exercises, at least in the time that I've been here, and Phil Breedlove started before me, we've consistently been integrating them more, the national exercises, the US UCOM, the SHAPE NATO exercises. And the integration has to do with not more or increasing the exercises. I actually think that I would prefer to have a little less, but have them much more focused and integrated in terms of what level of our tactical proficiency they practice, and if they're connected to things that we might have to do in crisis. So we can focus on interoperability, a complete realm, so that we can focus on connectivity of ISR and sensors, the interoperability piece that's so difficult. So what we've done is we've actually started working very hard at our component levels, that's air, ground, maritime, and then pulling that up in order to increasingly improve. And what you're going to see in a couple of years here is some exercises that, and we've already started, but exercises that might make you think of Reforger a bit. In the sense that it'll be something that'll have deployability, mobility, immediate action in terms of the arrival of units into a tactical problem set. All of it defensive, all of it announced, not a threat to Russia, but it's training that you know and I know in an alliance we have to do. So that's where we're going, and I'm very confident of that.
Thank you very much. This gentleman.
Viggo Dzušaskas, former EU Special Representative in Afghanistan, where we met with both generals, and until October, EU Ambassador to Russia. I won't ask about Afghanistan, because the speaker and President will be here in a few minutes, but I have a question about NATO-Russia. Many people follow Donald Trump's preparations for Helsinki, and also draw also draw parallels, or possible parallels, of Singapore and whatever will happen in Helsinki. So can I ask both generals, would you advise to cancel the NATO military exercises in the Baltic states, which from my point of view would be a huge mistake?
Okay, well, I'll take that. First of all, my perspective on this is, and I've had this conversation with my counterpart in Russia, is we're transparent. Our exercises are defensive in nature, not offensive. We don't have anything that goes beyond those borders. And we publish those, not only in line with what's expected with the treaties, but just generally so that there's no provocation, no surprise. So from my point of view, this is training that needs to be done. It's part of our deterrence, and it's not provocative. Now, what I do as a commander is I look at this, I look at the dynamics of our environment, and we have the ability to flex those so that we know we're not provocative, giving changes in our environment. As I said, I've talked to my counterparts. One of our main points of discussion was how we each view exercises, and I would trust that he'll be as transparent as well as we go forward here.
Thank you. Mike, right behind you.
Bobo Lowe, French Institute of International Relations. General, surprisingly little has been said over the last couple of days about the challenge of China. So I was interested to hear how you saw the future of NATO-China interaction over the coming years. Are we talking about containment as reflected in the spirit of the National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy of the United States? Are we talking about some increased level of cooperative engagement, or maybe a sort of a continuation of the Obama era, sort of hedging both ways? And also perhaps you could specify how you see the challenge of the Belt and Road Initiative and more generally of China's expanding influence across Eurasia.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say this. I'm going to address this from a military perspective because much of what you asked me is actually policy. But I'll stay within, the SACEUR's area. We've had, as you know, Chinese vessels within the Euro-Atlantic region. They've conducted exercises in the Med, in the Atlantic, and the High North. Actually, the way we've approached this is that they have a right in international space, airspace, sea, etc., just as I do, and we've approached them with an approach of, for instance, doing a PASEX, acknowledging them, and communication and interaction, so that we begin to understand each other's capabilities. We're not a threat to each other, etc. So it's been more of a relationship like that. Now, having said that, as a leader, China is developing relationships throughout the Euro-Atlantic. They have been active in relationships with respect to ports, airports, significant infrastructure. As a competitor, I think that has a security dimension that I think we have to pay attention to. And so it's one that I'm watching as well.
And the last question over here, please. And I'm sorry that we're out of time. I know there are a lot of questions, but I follow orders.
Thank you very much indeed. Jane Morris is my name. I'm from Northern Ireland, and I think that that goes without saying that I've some experience of what we're talking about today. But the title of this is Changing Defence in a Changing World. And I'm surprised to hear everything's about military and defence and capabilities and all these words. Where's the peace building in this? I was involved in the Good Friday Agreement as a women's movement, and we got to the peace talks, and it was about civil society. It was about bringing civil society in. And my analysis now is that there's three types of it. There's peacemaking, which are the diplomats and the politicians. There's peacekeeping, which are the hard hats, and with great respect, all that the security forces, etc., and yourselves are doing. But there are the peace builders, and that's civil society, and that's women and young people. Yeah. And my question to you, therefore, is, does NATO not have a huge role, especially that for every €1 spent on peace building, you save €7 in defence? So you've even got an economic argument for doing much more peace building than defence and security and fighting. Thank you.
So I'm glad you brought this up. First of all, I'll attack this in a few ways. My job is to prevent conflict and to ensure the peace in the Euro-Atlantic. That's my first job. And frankly, the best way I do that is to reinforce our diplomats and other civilians that you mentioned who are helping build capacity and peace and stability in countries. I'm kind of their muscle in a sense as well. Now, within this summit, we have very clear directives on defense capability building, whether it's in Jordan, Tunisia, Iraq, a new mission in Iraq, etc. Some of those are focused on military, you're right, but some of that is capacity building for security for those governments so that we can help them maintain the stability, build the stability, and allow their government to deliver services to the people. If we've not learned anything in the past 17 years of conflict, it's that this is a whole-of-government approach, and we got to learn how to win the peace. So I'm with you. I just happened to get all the questions about the military aspect of this. But yeah, but I support your perspective fully.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll join me in expressing our appreciation to General Scaparrotti. Thank you, Mike. We are fortunate enough to have a leader of his qualities and a strategic thinker at the helm of the military leadership, and we wish you all of the best. I know you have at least another year to go, but you're the right man in the right place, and we appreciate everything you're doing for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you much. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage the Editor-in-Chief of Deutsche Welle, Ms. Ines Pohl.
And now everybody's leaving. That's not a good sign.